Hey everyone, Tactics here, bringing you yet another Season 2 Mythic Plus guide. This time I'll be looking at a dungeon a lot of people have been dreading, Brackenhide Hollow. I'll go over everything that you need to know to get through this dungeon smoothly, including important interrupts, abilities to be aware of, boss mechanics and strategies, and much more. On top of that, I'll be going through a simple, pug-friendly route in MDT at the end of the video, which you can also find linked down in the description below. On top of my intro Mythic Plus guides like this one, which you can find over on my channel or linked in the description, I'll also be putting out advanced guides once the season starts, which will go through tips and tricks that you can use to help time all of these Season 2 dungeons on higher key levels. So if that's something that interests you, make sure you just subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you know when those get posted. Otherwise, let's get into what these gnolls actually do, because there's a lot of them. One of the more common ones in this beginning area are the Cruel Bone Crushers. These guys have a single ability in Crushing Smash, which is just a physical tank hit, not super dangerous at all. Just note it has a 30% slow for 10 seconds attached to it, so it can be annoying. Claw Fighters are another common mob in this area. They have a very important stop in Vicious Claw Mangle. This is just a random target fixate, but it can be very painful if they get any melees off on their fixate target, so make sure you use some form of CC to break this ability. They also have a random target melee physical hit in a Bloody Bite. This is a very common ability you're going to see on quite a few mobs, and I'll mention it whenever we do see a mob that has it. And basically this will do a physical hit and put a 15-second bleed on the target, which will remain on them for that 15-second duration or until they're healed above 90% health. So you want to make sure that healers, you stay on top of this. The big scary mobs in this area that I'm sure a lot of people will remember from Mythic Zeros of this place at the beginning of Dragonflight are the Bracken War Scourge. Pack Tactics is an aura they have around them in a 15-yard radius. It increases their allies' damage by 15% and gives them 25% CDR, so be aware any pack with this guy will be more difficult. They have Rage Storm ability, which is a 10-yard AoE Blade Storm effect around them for 10 seconds, but funnily enough, it's also an Enrage effect, so you can just soothe it instead of just avoiding this mob for 10 seconds. Importantly, they have an interrupt in Hideous Cackle. This will fear everyone within 30 yards for 4 seconds if it goes off, which will likely put you into other trash packs, so you want to make sure you kick this at a very high priority. And then of course, they have that Bloody Bite ability that I just mentioned. There are some ranged mobs in this area as well, the Bone Bolt Hunter. These guys have a couple stoppable abilities. The first is not too important in Toxic Trap. This just throws a swirly at a random player that will eventually activate into a trap that leaves a puddle behind if it's ever stepped on. Not too important here. I would just move away from it, not worry about stopping it. The important one to stop is Bone Bolt. Another random target ability, which will deal a decent sized physical hit and bleed the target for 12 seconds. So if you have to choose to stop the Bone Bolt. They are also joined by Vicious Hyenas. They have one ability in Infected Bite, which will just deal damage to a random player in melee, physical damage that is, and it'll put a 12-second debuff on them that reduces their healing taken by 15%. Casters in this area are the Decay Speaker. This is another Lieutenant mob here, just like the War Scourge, so it can't be CC'd. They have a couple casts. The first is Decay Surge, just a tank targeted nature hit. Interrupt that if you have spare kicks. The more important kick is definitely Withering Burst. This is a random target nature hit that does a 4-yard AoE around the target, and it applies the Withering Disease. And just like the Bloody Bite, this Withering Disease will show up on quite a few different abilities. What this Withering Disease actually is just a dot that will stack that has a 2% haste and move speed reduction, and it reapplies itself every 5 seconds and is eventually capped at 10 stacks. So make sure Disease Dispels are going to be very important in this dungeon. They also have one more ability here, that's Rot Chanting Totem, and this will basically empower any Trick Claw Mystics in the same trash pack while this totem remains alive. Now, Trick Claw Mystics, what these guys do is they have a kickable ability in Earth Bolt, which is just a random nature hit, but if that Rot Chanting Totem is alive, this Earth Bolt cast transforms into Wither Bolt, which instead of being just a random target nature hit, is now a random target nature hit that also applies a stack of that Withering dot. So again, Disease Dispels, very good, and luckily if you are lacking a Disease Dispel, Alchemists can actually provide Disease Dispels in this dungeon. There are various pots throughout this entire dungeon actually, not just in this beginning area, and if an Alchemist with high enough skill interacts with it, it'll let your whole party grab a 5-minute buff that gives them an extra action button that can cleanse any diseases from themselves. You just basically can self-disease cleanse. So that's very nice. If you're lacking a disease cleanse, those pots can definitely help you. Just make sure you have an alchemist. So the trash mobs in this first area, basically, they're going to be defending these Tuskar cages. You have to free 5 Tuskars from cages throughout this area, and once you have done that, you'll be able to move on and fight the first boss, a trio known as Hackclaw's Warband. Starting with the caster of the group, Trick Totem, she has a couple interruptible spells, the first being Earthbolt, just like before, random target nature damage, so you want to kick as many of these as you can, but you also want to ensure that you have one kick available for when she casts Greater Healing Rapids, as this will heal one of the gnolls instantly and then put a magic hot on them as well, so make sure this never goes off, just going to make the fight last longer. Gashtooth has a fair amount of random damage, with the first being marked for Butchery. This is just a random target fixate effect that deals damage every half second for 4 seconds. So if this targets you, you really want to pop a defensive, especially if you're a Clothy. On top of this, he will also use Gash Frenzy to deal 5 physical hits to random players, and each hit will apply a stacking 45-second long bleed in the process. Luckily, this can also be removed by healing players above 90% health, just like that Bloody Bite from earlier, and similar to that old Mythic Plus affix Grievous. The third and final boss, Rira Hackclaw, has a buff that causes her attacks to passively cleave all players in front of her within 8 yards, so make sure that she's always facing away from the group. She will also sometimes use Blade Storm, dealing heavy damage to anyone within 8 yards of her, and then chasing after a single player in the process, so make sure if this is on a ranged player, you kite this away from the 2 remaining bosses, and if it's on a melee player, you move the 2 remaining bosses along with that melee player so you can all stay as a group. Together, Trick Totem, Gashtooth, and Hackclaw create a pretty nasty ability overlap, which involves locking down both your tank and healer at the same time. Trick Totem will deal Hextrick Totem. This channels an incapacitate on your healer for 15 seconds or until you destroy the totem. Simultaneously, Gashtooth will use Decayed Sense on your tank, dealing nature damage and leaving a 15-second magic debuff on them that blinds them and increases their physical damage taken. If that wasn't enough, Hackclaw will begin casting Savage Charge at a random player, which will deal extremely high, usually lethal to non-tank players amounts of physical damage to just the first player that she collides with after 14 seconds. The goal here, kill the totem ASAP to break your healer free. That lets your healer dispel your tank, and that lets your tank step in the path of the Savage Charge. Note, of course, if you have something like a Warlock or a Shadow Priest in your group, they can also free the tank immediately because they have their own magic dispel. There's a couple other of buffs to be aware of here. One, Prey on the Weak. This gives the Warband 10% haste for each 10% total health missing from the players, so you want to try and keep people topped off for the entire duration of this fight. On top of that, when any of the members hits 15% health, all 3 of the Warband will be buffed with Blood Frenzy, increasing their haste and damage by 30% until dead. So the end of this fight can get very scary, and you want to make sure you don't push one Warband member way earlier than the others. Upon defeating the Warband here, you have the choice to go left through the Gauntlet of Traps and Gnoll Hunters along with their beast companions, or right through the Plagued River and its inhabitants. Let's just say here, for sake of argument, we're going to go right. There are some gnolls here still. The Brackenhide Shaper is another caster mob. They have an ability in Summon Lashers. Again, this is an ability that is going to be quite common in this area. And basically what this does is it summons an infected Lasher mob. And these guys will just bleed random people. It does stack as well, but luckily this bleed usually isn't too dangerous and the Lashers have very little health. They also have a interruptible ability in Touch of Decay. This is just a tank targeted nature hit, can also be stopped, as can that Lasher cast. And then finally, they have Infused Corruption, again a channel that will apply Withering, that same disease dot as before, every 3 seconds and lasts 6 seconds, so interruptible or stoppable there. Decayed Elders are trees in this area, again with that Summon Lashers cast, and also their own cast in Decaying Roots. This is a random target magic root effect and 9-second nature dot with a 10% haste reduction, so make sure you use either a movement impairing freeing effect or a magic dispel. Wilted Oaks are lieutenant mobs in this area. Again, they will summon Lashers, surprise, surprise. They also have a Stomp ability which deals AoE physical damage around a 10-yard radius of the mob, which will stun you if you're hit. And they also have a very important kick in Necrotic Breath. This will lock to a single random target and then deal a big frontal hit that also has a 15-second disease dot that has a 20% healing reduction attached to it. So make sure you're at the very least moving out of this, but hopefully just kicking it because that makes it much easier to deal with. Bedded Rotsinger are another lieutenant mob in this area, another gnoll as well. They have that same Pack Tactics 15-yard aura as the War Scourge we saw earlier. So again, note attacks will be more difficult whenever you pull a Fetid Rotstinger. On top of that, they will summon a Decay totem occasionally, and this totem will just do a cast every 5 seconds that applies Withering to every single party member, so make sure you swap this ASAP and kill it quickly. Finally, they have a Burst of Decay. This will go on the tank. This will deal a nature hit to them and then anyone within 5 yards of them, but it is kickable, so make sure you do that just to reduce the raid damage. A couple of slimes also exist in this area. They're relatively simple. The decaying slimes are small. They will just use Burst on death, leaving behind a puddle. Very easy to deal with. The Monstrous Decay is a Lieutenant Slime, much bigger. It'll use Gushing Ooze on a random player, and this is a nature hit with a 9-second dot. Kind of scary sometimes, so just be aware of that. They will also similarly use Burst, but this one's a little bit different. When they hit 20% health, they'll start this cast, and then if they succeed, they'll deal nature damage within 10 yards of them, and they'll spawn 3 of those decaying slimes that I mentioned previously, so just note that. Emerging from this plagued river, you'll come across the next boss, Treemouth, who throughout the encounter will slash your tank with Vine Whip, a pretty long frontal ability that deals physical damage and knocks back players' hit, so be aware, make sure you give your tank space, and tanks, make sure you're pointing this away from players. We also use Decay Spray, turning towards a random player and shooting several swirlies in their direction that you want to avoid. After they contact with the ground, they'll turn into those decaying slimes I mentioned earlier, who just like their trash counterpart will burst on death, leaving behind a puddle for 30 seconds, but they do have one new ability in Gushing Ooze, which is kickable, and if successfully cast, it will deal nature damage to players within 5 yards, so make sure you either outrange this or interrupt them. At full energy, Treemouth will use an important ability combo here, first pulling all players in with Grasping Vines, and then consuming any players within his swirly around him after 4 seconds. You do actually want to make sure that someone gets eaten each time this gets cast, as if you don't, the boss will gain Starving Frenzy, which is a 150% damage and 20% haste increase for 3 minutes, so definitely want to avoid that. Consumed players will take ticking nature damage for 10 seconds or until you break the absorb shield that the boss puts on himself after successfully eating someone, after which they'll gain a 1-minute debuff that causes them to take 200% increased damage from this consumption debuff, which essentially means that you can only soak every other consume. Note that you can also use an immunity after being consumed to instantly break out, negating that absorb effect entirely. Outside of this, Treemouth will just occasionally use Infectious Spit on random players. This is a disease that lasts for 20 seconds that deals ticking damage and slows players by 10% per stack, so make sure you dispel or just clear this with some movement freeing effects whenever possible. Now let's back up a touch here and talk about the mobs that you would face if you instead went left after the first boss. You've got the Rotbow Stalker. These are the most dangerous mobs in this area. They are, of course, a lieutenant mob, and they are often joined by hyenas or bears, which I'll talk about in a second here. Their main dangerous ability is Bone Bolt Volley, just like the Bone Bolt we saw earlier in Hunters, except this will be targeting every single player within 40 yards. Apply that same dot to them as well. So very, very scary, heavy raid damage. And of course, you can't avoid it because it's a lieutenant mob, so it's not stoppable whatsoever. So very, very scary. Note that. They also have Scented Meat, which they'll throw at a random target. This lasts 10 seconds. It is a dot, and it will cause nearby beasts that are in the pool to try and fixate the player thrown. So those can be the hyenas we talked about before. They can be the gut chewer bears that are also in this area, which have a single ability in Maul, just a physical tank hit, not really too important, but if they do that on a random player, that could be a problem, of course. Another beast in this area are the Flesh Ripper Vultures. These guys have a single cast in Screech, kickable or stoppable, and it's just a 40-yard physical hit and silence, so make sure you stop that cast. The last individual mob in this area are the Skulking Gutstabbers or Gutstabbers. Both do the same thing. They have Withering Poison, which is a random target nature hit and 15-second poison dot with a 40% haste and move speed reduction. So you want to make sure you either stop that or you have a poison dispel in your group to dispel it. Similarly, they have the Bloody Bite ability we talked about earlier that bleed as well. Now, between the area of the second boss and the third boss, that's Treemouth, and then a boss we're going to talk about in a second here, Gutshot, there are 2 mini bosses as well. Stink Breath is over towards Treemouth's side. This guy has an ability named after him, Stink Breath. This is a random target frontal. It will follow whoever it's targeting, and then it will do a nature hit to them and disorient them for 4 seconds, so it's quite annoying. Try not to cleave your friends with this. He also has Violent Whirlwind, which is just a channeled 7-yard AoE around the mob that will knock back anyone inside of it. So again, just make sure you back away from the mob. There's also a big bear in Rage Claw. This bear will just spam Feral Claw on your tank, just a physical hit, nothing too dangerous. They also have Bloodthirsty Charge, which will target a random player. It deals physical damage and then knocks back and puts a bleed dot on anyone in path, so beware of that. Finally, this mob will enrage if it ever reaches 100 energy. This is a 100% attack speed and 125% damage increase for 10 seconds, so if this ever happens, make sure to soothe it. Now, let's get to Gutshot, who is over on her own platform on the left side, joined by her hyenas, who are buffed by their leader, again gaining that 15% increased damage and 25% CDR when within 15 yards of her. In terms of what those abilities actually are, they have Bounding Leap, jumping towards a random player, dealing physical damage and then stunning anyone within 3 yards of the impact, and they also have Crippling Bite, dealing physical damage to their target and then leaving behind a 10-second dot that also reduces healing and speed by 50%, so much larger than the trash mobs. Help control and kill these hyenas, you can use one of the boss abilities against them, Ensnaring Trap, which will be thrown at 2 random players at a time, and then they'll arm after a few seconds, and then whenever either a player or a hyena touches them, they'll deal physical damage over 6 seconds and then root them for the duration. Very useful for locking these ads down while also killing them quite well. Just be careful, when the hyenas do trigger a trap, the boss will attempt to cast Master's Call. This is an interruptible cast, which will make any hyenas immune to snares and then increase their speed by 15% for 5 seconds, so make sure you have a kick on this. In terms of her other abilities, she'll use Gutshot on the tank. Moderate physical hit here, but it does have a knockback, so don't get shot either off the platform, which would be bad, or into a trap, also bad. On top of this, she will sometimes use a Meat Toss on a random player, causing any currently alive hyenas to fixate on that target, and then also enter a Feeding Frenzy, which is an enrage effect for 10 seconds that gives them 100% increased damage. Finally, she will intermittently just use Call Hyenas, adding 2 more of them to the fight, and they can appear either on the bridge that you came from or the cave that's already on this platform. Whether you choose to fight Treemouth or Gutshot second, you'll be able to reach the final boss area from either arena. There's a lot of smaller mobs here that all only have that one Bloody Bite ability. Witherlings, Witherbiters, Wither Slashers, all of them will only use that Bloody Bite ability. Different names, different health values, but all the same ability. Filth Callers in this area do have a cast in Decay Surge. Again, tank targeted nature hit here, similar to earlier in the dungeon. Rotting Surge is a little new though. This cannot be interrupted, but it can be stopped, and this will just be channeled and spawn several swirlies all over the place that leave puddles behind, so don't want to have to worry about dodging. Just make sure you commit a stop to this ability. Disease Slashers also in this area, they have Bloody Bite again, but they also have Decay Claws, which is a much more important stoppable ability, Physical Tank Hit, and Healing Absorb. Not actually very scary, but maybe on higher fortified keys it could be dangerous, so commit a stop to that anyways. Last mob in this area are the Vile Rothhexers, a final lieutenant mob. They have a Withering Contagion, which will be on a random target, and it'll deal nature damage to them in a 5-yard AoE, and apply a disease dot to them that has a 20% damage done decrease. Shortly after applying this debuff to a player, they'll attempt to cast Siphon Decay. This will clear any active Withering Contagion debuffs within 30 yards of the mob, and then deal nature damage to those players, and then buffs the mob for each stack consumed. So, if you have a Disease Dispel available, make sure you dispel this Withering Contagion. If you don't have a Disease Dispel available, make sure whoever has debuffs runs 30 yards away from this Vile Rothhexer, so you don't take a bunch of damage and you don't juice it up with buffs. Eventually, you'll find yourself within a large cave, and hidden in a small cubby within this cave is the final boss, Decatriarch Wratheye. The main idea of this fight is managing your Withering Rot stacks. This is just a debuff that will go on players. It's a stacking nature dot, and it decreases your damage done by 5%, and is only removed either by immuning the stacks off or by the boss's ultimate ability, Decaying Strength. This is cast when Wratheye reaches max energy, and it will cause players to erupt around themselves, dealing damage to not only themselves, but anyone else within their radius, and this radius is increased by the number of rot stacks that you have. Once it does explode, all of your stacks are removed, but then the boss gains Decaying Strength stacks equal to the number of rot stacks that she consumed, and this increases her damage by 5% per stack, though note she will lose a stack for each successful melee attack afterwards. Looking at the abilities that do apply this Withering Rot, there's a Frontal and Choking Rot Cloud, which spawns a large circle directly in front of the boss that then rotates around the edges of this boss area here, serving as area denial. If you ever touch this circle, you get a stack. Note that this Frontal does lock into place when the cast starts, so tanks face the boss towards the edge of the room, and then make sure you do step away and out of it so that you don't instantly get a stack yourself. Most importantly, the boss will spawn Rot Burst totems throughout the fight, also near the edges of this arena somewhere randomly, and these will just spam cast Rotting Burst while alive, which deals nature damage to all players and applies a single stack of Withering Rot to all of them. One cast going off means 5 buff stacks for the boss on the next ultimate ability, so this is the #1 damage priority whenever it spawns. You really want to make sure you have as few casts, ideally 0, go off. Outside of that, the boss just has a Tank Buster in Decay Strike. This is 2 physical hits along with a Healing Absorb for each successful hit. Luckily though, this does not apply that same Rot debuff, but regardless, tanks need to be aware of it. From there, let's look at a simple, easy to execute pug-friendly route here in MDT, which again will be linked down in the description below if you want to import it for yourself. Goal here, as always, to avoid any weird skips or large difficult pulls. Just something very straightforward while you're still learning this dungeon early on in the season. Feel free though to adjust the pulls, make them bigger, add in skips as you see fit. So starting off here, you can just hug the left side here, pull this one mob. There's a Tuskar Cage here by this first pack, Tuskar Cage over here by the second pack, another one over here by the 5th pack, by the 6th pack, and by the 7th pack. So those are your 5 Tuskar Cages there. You can basically, again, very straightforward, nothing too crazy you're trying to skip. I think the hardest thing is to skip this 2 mob, which is not a big deal if you accidentally pull it. You just hug the left here, and then you're basically just W keying, pulling all the trash in your way. Both these packs look like they're a lot closer than they are. It's actually nowhere near your path. Run around here. Just one thing to watch is this patrol. Just be careful of it. Again, though, if you need to pull it, feel free to pull it. It does have a War Scourge in it and a Decay Speaker, so you ideally don't. Ideally, just maybe pull this 3-pack away if they patrol near you, but not the end of the world if you grab them. Then you kill this 1 pack in front of the boss, and then you get to the boss itself. The boss, again, is more positioned like these packs, again, not ideally, not exactly where they are actually in game. So this is again, not going to be hard for you to get around. It's just not really in the way whatsoever. In this route, I am actually going to assume you go right. I think left is a little bit too dangerous. You're pretty punished by not only the hunters, but the stalkers in particular. Again, really, really big AoE party damage from the bolt volley. The fixates can just insta-give people. Obviously, the vulture kicks, if you miss a kick, people are silenced for 4 seconds. People are taking big damage. Plus, there's a ton of poisons over here from the gut stabbers dealing random damage poison effects. I actually just generally think the right side is going to be better. Maybe though, this is a take for when people are more familiar with the dungeon, but I think this is superior. Again, note of all these pulls, there's sometimes just a bunch of lashers in these pulls. They don't really do anything. They have very low HP. They will randomly bleed, but they will die so quickly that it won't actually be noticeable. So really what you're focusing here is you're hugging right, you're grabbing a Shaper and an Elder, plus 1 Oak. You have a couple kicks in this pack, a couple stops. Not a big deal. The only actual high priority kick is from that Wilted Oak, right? So if the roots go off, not a big deal. You can Freedom it, you can Magic Dispel it, or you can just kind of sit there with it. It's not really the end of the world if the roots go off. The breath is the one thing you want to go off. So the big thing here is there's plenty of avoidable damage in this area that you can use interrupts or stops or just avoid entirely or whatever. Whereas the other side, there isn't. So that's why I'm recommending going right after the first boss. Then you're kind of W king here. Again, if you get some of these lashers, it's not a big deal. You just cleave them down. Rotsinger in this pack, so make sure you focus those totems. That's the biggest thing. Whenever the Rotsingers are in the pack, which I believe there's only two Rotsinger pulls in this entire area, make sure you hard swap with a totem when it spawns. In this area, 12, 13, 14 here, kind of depends just on this patrol here. You can pull these separately, of course. You can pull them in any order. Besides, 12 has to be first, though. It's kind of, again, weird positioning-wise. 12 has to be first, and you can pick 13 or 14, whichever is actually ready for you at that time. Pull the Rotsinger with whichever one you prefer. Again, not a big deal either way. There is a Shaper in this pack, and then there's just 2 Elders in this pack, so it kind of depends which ones you'd rather keep more kicks on. Moving forward, again, Decaying Slimes, Wild Lashers, making this pull look absolutely massive, but they really die so quickly. So really, this is just, again, a Wilted Oak with a Rotsinger and a couple Elders. Eventually, all the way down there, they're a patrol, so they may not be right here in this pack. And again, just a ton of Lashers, but really just 1 Wilted Oak, or 2 Wilted Oaks, rather. 2 Wilted Oaks together, and that brings you to Treemouth. This does pull Stink Breath. There's going to be ways to get around him with like Mind Soothe, with Warlock Gates, with like combat drops, that thing. People are definitely going to be skipping him on high keys. Obviously, this is a W key route. He has stealth detection, so you can't invis him, so we're just pulling him. If you run through to across the bridge, there's also these Gut Stabbers, which are in stealth, so be careful of that. You can pull them with or just after. And then you can actually run around here and just hug this right side and avoid all this trash in the middle of the room here. Jump down, pull this pack over here by the cave, pull this giant patrol in the middle, which again is also pretty easily avoidable, but I'm guessing people are going to struggle with that early in the season, so I'm not going to avoid it in this route here for that specific reason. And then you can go up, pull this bear into Gutshot herself. Not too hard. Gutshot's not going to be too dangerous with a bear mob, which really only hits your tank. And then you can move across here this bridge and start making your way towards the final boss. Another thing, positioning is wrong again in this area. So this pack doesn't exist. This pack doesn't exist. There's 6 Wither Biters in this first area that come with this pull. I've just selected some that are over here, but there will be 6 here with this pink pull. And then there's 1 Patrol in the War Scourge. And then you can add 1 or 2 Vile Rot Hexers at a time. These guys aren't linked, so you can just tag them. And the big thing here is, again, you can just walk around the rest of the trash. Really, really great in this dungeon. You don't actually need a lot of like Shroud Skips. You don't need Mind Soothe. You can walk around a lot of trash here. It's actually quite nice. So just note that you can walk around this side and then make your way into the cave. Couple pulls in the cave, and then you have Wratheye there. The big thing is that I do pull this Patrol Vile Rod Hexer into one of these pulls, because otherwise, if you try and skip it, there is a chance that someone butt pulls it during the boss fight, and that's definitely death. So again, just get those potential butt pulls out of the way. Pull the mobs on purpose so pugs can't mess things up for you and cause a wipe later down the line. But there we go, guys. If you found this video useful, please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like it, including guide videos for all 8 dungeons out soon, and then advanced routing videos for more tips and tricks in higher keys coming shortly after the season launches. Also, raid boss guides too, so if any of that interests you, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions regarding this dungeon, feel free to drop those down in the comments below, or come ask on my Twitch channel at Tactics, where I stream high mythic plus keys and mythic rating from a tank POV. Of course, gotta shout out my fantastic supporters over on Patreon. Thanks so much for helping me create all of this content. Otherwise, thanks everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.